Coming to the 3 lines of communication screens is all of the high settings. What does that mean through track locations? What did I just say? Does it mean anything to you? No. Does it mean everything to me? Yes. So what I just said is all lines of provision for me to understand, not for you. What I mean by that is we come into our own settings, our own coding system. Now, you understand that calculation setting and position location. You start with your inner child. Your inner child volumes the set lines where it understands itself completely to its higher self, to its avatar, to its sim. Modification screen lines and high direct signal locations, not just lines of fabric with space or anything instructions, but understanding its own coding system, its own binary system, its own computer operation system, its own computer framing system. How to direct that all through communication of imagination. Let me say it again, imagination. All right, so if I say a code line center, E line connection, I center, and factors over pi, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything to you, it means everything to me. But the team will pick it up to its image, at their frame, at their frequency, at their coding, at their space, and their time. Okay? Coding lines, it's communication line screens, and it comes into truth narratives and false narratives, and really track this communication setting. The process of position location of false narratives alone in calculation line condition is the yang. That's the line communication of space and time. Your space and time, so is space itself. Space is itself, so is time itself. There's a 3-track division there, guys. You in the center sets position left and right and set locations. Right? Space, time, you. Okay? That's all it is. Yin and yang, yin and yang, yin and yang. Process communications and all levels of travel lines in its own binary line communication setting instruction. Okay? So you have to really understand the balance now of space and time. That's the location. Space, yin and yang, you yin and yang, and time yin and yang. That's process you have to come into. All has line tracks and its high center of variance in positions coding, decoding, e-coding. E-coding line connections high center of variance is an application center, not a position location to its system, is understanding how the team has to understand how to use their own computers of its own running system, run its own system, its own program locations. Run. Okay, 4 dots is location, run, right? What does run mean? Well, it means something different to you and you different to me. So not position locations. It's all levels of track location line connections, right? So you have to really understand how it works in all lines. Unifications, remembering line center sign interference, remember line communication interference, unification lines, neutralize communication setting of travel. 4-track provisions, binary code line centers of 0, 0, 0, 1 track location. Okay? So it's running on line communications and 3-track locations. Okay? So understanding the track communication of its running its program, it's its own coding. Okay, coding comes in always in forms. But remember, you can do anything through imagination. It's not for them to understand, it's for you to understand your own system. Understand your own system is understand your own space and your own time. Okay? Because space itself has its own process. Just as time has its own process at locations, right? So everything is a process and in position. So it's mostly important to understand these things because when you're looking at the perception and all calculations, you have to understand that things are coming to you and you have to run its program so it doesn't overload your system. Okay, so you can get balance with that. That's why it's so important to scan your system before you look at anything or before you touch anything or before you hear anything. Where you're walking across the street lines and you're overhearing a conversation. That's vibration, that's frequencies, that's harmonics, that's its own binary, that's its own code, right? So it's running your system, running the programs and set location, okay? Tractors over pi lines, the high center interference, and 3 set position of 4 tracks, sets lines of 3-track location and in provision line connections, bracket interference, and 3-track location. Okay, yeah, this is all done through the mind. So whatever I say, it works because I got the recognitions of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols of its own formula, of its own equation, of its own awareness, of its own consciousness. Let me say that again. of its own awareness, of its own consciousness, that it identifies everything in set locations. So one number is own levels of its own setting, of its own binary code in all calculations transmitting and receiving its information cycles of transistors and resistors. It's its own binary coding system, its own CPU system location. Okay? So once you understand that, in line communications, so generally you're saying that one is its own binary system? Yep. You're saying that in position location one is its own space and time system? Yep. So everything that you see around you is a modification of operation already. That's existing of its existence. You got to find that position in your travel lines and your frequencies. Setting line communication in your program sets lines of calculation setting. How do you run your own system of coding? Okay. So that's what we're going to do today. The team's going to go through line connected high interference. So it's very exciting. Aren't you excited to know exactly what happens when you're in communication to when you see a computer and how it runs its own system? Aren't you curious and understanding where it comes into its own binary of its own coding system and decoders and codecs or any of the information line connections? You know what you're doing with your imagination, people, and that's all it is. You program your own system, your own programming. You do your own coding, right? So to understand that is to change the coding. So when you change the coding, you're changing the space and time, which is changing everything of its clocking, right? If you set an E-clock location, okay, E-clock location setting, right? Now, remember I told you about the locations in the higher self where it has the bracket communication interference, has position of track lines, graph calculation, screen line calculation setting, graphical screen interference. That's location grid, right? And the higher self goes through, right? Higher self goes through, right? Through the acceleration, right? Remember I told you about, right? That's an E-clock line connection of location, right? So the more you understand position line centers, you understand the location grid is its center lines of communication of travels that defies its system and travel communication. Which means I can change the location grid and its setting in factors that will correlate setting attraction. Okay, so that changes the E-line connections of its clocking to its E-cloud, to its I-cloud, right, to its dimensional cloud, interference cloud, correlations clouds. Everything is a track locations to its recognition of time sequence, puts everything beyond the high calculation setting of travels, right? You are the system. You're above the system. You're beyond the system. So identifying you in all ways and forms is really getting you to understand how this all works inside of you. How do I get into that application? How do I get into that fonts of me in position of track lines? You know, there's all lines of all communication. You are identifying yourself inside, all through a coding system, which is amazing. It's amazing. The only difference is that there is no limited resource inside of you. You are limitless, shapeless, formless, in all ways and forms of clockings. Okay, which is so incredible of its own set design, of its own makeup, okay, and its own structure, of its own schematics. This is about you understanding you, how to process that through your datas, your uplinking, your downloading, uploading, and upgrading systems. All right. All right, so we're going to set line connections because you're in your iCloud communications, direct modification screen settings. So we got the iClouds, systematic line screen. Setting one line, change position travel lines, point lines of attractions. Sync, and then calculation line screens. Direct modification line interference, encoding. Basic ground lines, correlation setting into binary. Setting correlation setting and track lines into 0.1 and track locations into team setting. Okay, that's the coding for you, basic ground lines, how to get in your coding. All right, so have fun on that line center. You have 20 minutes on the clock. That's 20 million line screens. This application line sets in. That's 20 billion cycles per frame. 20 billion cycles per frame through one binary code. 20 billion binary code line connections of transmitting and receiving information. The process of communication is really understand how to see yourself in lines of data Process line communication setting in your position of the program in a 3-sentence calculation. Point lens of tracks, graph calculation line centers in position of settings. So you have coding, decoding, and you have encoding. And then you have codecs. Okay? So you make it whatever you want to make it. That's the beautiful thing about it. Okay? So it's really interesting when you look at the code line screen and direct saves modification screen interference trap positional point centers. You put an X line, Y line, J line, equal locations of box. That's coding right there. That's positional location of binary. Now, you understand location of the X and position location of the one setting, track location of teleportations, equal lines, coordinate setting, track lines, into box locations. You can even change the lines, but you have to reset the binary. So that's position 1, 2, and 3 track locations, 3 provision cycles, false in location of truth and false. It says correlation line sign of inference. You always have to go truth, false, false, truth, whatever. Position line calculation, but you have to stay in the binary and position locations so you can reset the codes to seconds, minutes, and hours again, right? Because you have to understand the connection when you go higher, you have to reframe, retract, reprovision your holographic set location screen settings. Puts binary centers, lines, and communication setting in the upper recent surface and track location. Okay? So it's incredible force line when you understand how to use your imagination. But the imagination has to recognize everything. So the direct line conditions, if you're using 1 equals line cycle, sets location into a dx line condition. Okay? You have to understand the representation, what it is through its formula. Okay, of its equation. Okay? It's formula of its equation. All right? If you don't, you're in a question. Okay? Configuration is everything, guys, to travel line position of point centers. So you guys are going to go in your line communications or coding yourself to understand how to run your own system and set locations. So you can protect yourself of everything that you see in tractions. You guys have your binaries, you have your position location transistors and resistors through its capacity of its volume that has light switches that go on and off and track locations. So the faster you go, the more you get modulations, the more you can stay in that set line calculation setting. So again, you use your imagination, turn it in line connections to its reality, set a communication line, screen high interference location in your system. You can allocate position of time centers, but the most powerful thing in all communication is what you're doing through traction. You're doing it through your settings, which is all the levels of the mind. The mind comes into acceptance of what you're doing. Okay, your position line centers is center operation of what you're doing through your universe location system, and track locations to your earth, which is your brain line. It interference locations, you're ready to go. You get a 3-track division line cycles, codecs and codecs and codecs and set locations. Or you got a position of coding, set position of codecs, set position location of decode, and set calculations, right? So track location equalizes the earth, track locations of you and track locations, and coding locations of its mind system. Okay? The mind itself is doing its own coding. You're doing your own coding. And your earth is doing its own connection settings to its own position of its brain set location, all through line conditions of division. All right? So, like I said, you got to get balance of the mind, yourself, and set calculations to your position lines of tractions into your brain. Intercepting lines. Everything that you say is coding. You have to send the singularities to patterns, 2-line communication, split lines, anomalies, and track location. Okay? Indicate outline line centers is 0. Sets position 1 traction and 2, 3 tractions. Okay? Sets communication line screens and high center interference and a pi track location. Remember, it's all levels of an image, right? Pi ratio of time, split the anomalies and travel. Sets correlation setting. And that's where it gets interesting because you add lines of A tracks into B line center. Then you add a DX into a question. Now, a question is basically not a question, which you understand what a question is. A question lines is formation line calculation setting and stream location affinity 8. It allocates position of time center that opens all sequence location systems its own binary code and line calculation setting a balanced position of travels and set location. Very powerful stuff. All right. So once you understand the coding line communication setting, you understand the resource line against its own source location of travels. It directs modification setting in travel in the communication system, its own system that's running its own setting. So you have to understand what a computer does as it runs its own program. And it runs its own coding, decoding, defrag, frag. Right? So you have to understand that through all faults in all communications, defaults, regulators, okay, process communications, applications, centerline communications. So you are limitless of resource, of source, which basically you can change anything through your settings, location, your drafts, or anything that correlates likeness to your websites, or location, your designs, or your networks, or anything Neuralinks, or anything through operations. Okay? So you have to start recognizing that in likeness to your own code is inside location. Right? So whatever you say, it doesn't matter as long as it makes sense to you and you actually see it change. You actually see what it's doing. It's doing its own operation of its own system, of its own setting. Okay, it's very powerful when you come into the singularities to its binaries. Singularity equals binary, right? Binary communication lines of 2, 3, and 4 track locations. 2 equals lines of 3, 4, right? Sets locations change to 3 line. Triangulation split line communication molecule design line. Sets correlations of 4. So we add the position of 4 track locations, right? Okay. Now, where's the central line communications coming from in track locations? One line cycle, high center interference, equal lines of correlation setting the paddles, indirections in weather and communication centers of travel communication to point centers. Puts position lines of 2 over 3 over 4 in track locations high setting, all levels of operational line connections of a solar sail and traction. See? It's all schematics, it's all structure, it's all design, the coding. So you have to understand how to use your letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols so you can understand how to create your own communication, your own inventory. Now you can use that through time frame. 16 box centers, position of 2-point centers into 50 position location calculations, sets lines of 2 lines of 1, and position of 4 generation screens. Time sequence, 2 panels, 4 calculation. Right? Now, that is just through observation. If I add the equations, it's in box triangulation. Sets communications, program setting. Boom. Intention. So now in line connections, you guys have seen that through its image. So what I did through its time, through its portal, and through its settings in a 4-track location, right? And again, this is a binary. All right? Split the noms in 3-track line connections. 2 binary sets, space, position of time, and time. Correlation equal lines of false, time position lines of true, space position lines of false, and position location of false or true location setting. Space lines communication of north, east, west, and south in set location. So it's knowing what you're doing is how it's operating inside of you. So it's really, really confusing if you don't understand your own settings to run your own system, your own coding to your own algorithms to create a website of set design. And that's what an algorithm does. So let's go through E factors. E factor position lines calculation, something simple. Well, E factor communication, sets correlation setting in the CPU. And we'll initiate and we'll execute. And line condition settings, set line position run. Run system position of travel lines. 3 communication screen lines in question communication. Okay? That's an algorithm, right? Now, in position, all lines split the noms in 3 track lines of provision cycles. Calculation modified. Earth, atmosphere, space, right? 3 provision cycles. Box line, rotors, rudders, line communication, streamline connections, right? That's an algorithm. Okay, now it's all position locations. Run the system, it's running, right? Sets correlation setting attractions, sets lines of communications, magnetic highway information line screen, high interference. There's the image and set location. Okay, so this is this. This is this. Okay, this is the structure, this is the formula, all right? Hoo-ah! right? Coming into your own binary is really understanding, listening to everything through track line condition settings. Okay, so come into defrag. Now we understand position of defrags. Fragmentation, screen lines, the highest interference. Defrag to frag. Okay, so offline, online. Off, okay, equals lines of on as allocations, right? Defragging to on, right? On is locations of off. And what a computer does through its memory set locations of Cortex design, right? So you are in charge of everything that you do through your own coding system, right? So it's kind of like creating a traffic flow. Remember the direct line condition settings of 0, 1s instructions, its applications. You can add fragmentation screen lines, adaptation surface, platitude line screen size interference. We've got 3 lines of set position of 6. Setting correlation lines, solar sail, track lines, highest interference of 1, 0, and 0 set location. Okay, very complicated, very confusing, but that's binary. Okay, so you have to understand the mechanism inside lines in your computer frame, in your box frame, position travel lines, and set location zone setting. Okay, so in direct lines calculation line interference, we take the 0 line, put a triangulation split in 2 lines of anomaly. And this is where it comes into all lines of your cells, your molecules, protons, electrons, neutrons, photons, and how to use it, location of its own binary system, because that's what it's doing. All it's doing in position is setting you up in calculation. So every time you're speaking through an image that's created through its singularity of its binary to its coding system. Okay? All right. So whatever you say is already done in an equation. So add line calculation, split the anomalies into 3 track lines, 6 position locations of 8. Okay, setting correlation, setting of tracks into 1, 2, and 3 set locations. Trap correlation line tractions in the walls of cerebro and the opposite direct signals in set location. Okay, all through modification, right? So that's all it is. The actual computer itself is trying to recognize its identity. Once it understands its identity through a 7-track location line connections, you're ready to run its program. It runs its line connections. Everything has identification code. So anything you do through disk or anything that you get through USB, it's running its system. So it can protect its own system from anything that you give it to through perception. So understanding everything around you has its own binary cortex of its own design that has its own mechanism location setting to its existing of its existence. But to understand you through coding is all levels of abstraction. That provisions you in all lines of all communication settings, right? This opens all levels of you in calculations. All right, so I'm just showing you the basic foundations when you get into your own codings, your own applications. All right. Factors over line. Factors equals over line. Now you can split that communications. That's binary. Right? Square roots. Calculations of a question. That's a binary. Because the thing is understanding a formula is basically understanding you, right? Through the letters, numbers, shapes, and the symbols, right? It's really all identifications of you, right? This is the process how you see this, understand this, you travel through it. And when you travel through it, not only you see it, you come into co-creating. Because everything you're creating through a binary is nothing equal line communication setting, all track locations, and all line communications of an image. Okay, that's all it is. Factors over pi. Okay, so there's so many ways to set up a coding in all line and communication lines. You can start with initiation and run setting. Okay, use location lines, execute calculation interference. Okay, so it's running its system, but it doesn't understand location of default. So the default has to go back in its original design lines. Setting traffic communication to copy. It's communication lines of paste. Okay, too many lines of communication line interference of emblems, cross-line signals. Sets location setting, run system. Sets correlation setting track line. Oh, equal location error. All right, so you can't use an attraction. Okay, so it's stating that's an error. You're running the system, it doesn't work. The applications, the fonts, the information cycles, the descriptions, anything that track locations. Remember, it's you trying to understand you through your own information, right? So understanding your information is understanding everything around of its information, of its own coding, of its own binary, of its own transistor, and its resistor, of its capacity. This volumes you through vast of velocity of acceleration of Mach. Okay? There's so many ways of looking at yourself in set locations. Setting up that traffic flow, setting up that inventory, setting up that data, setting up the uploading, uplinking, downloading, upgrading system inside of you in seconds, minutes, and hours. So if you platitude a box screen, sets position of four positions, right? So that's 4 tracks, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a binary right there in track location. Okay, 444, box location line connections, setting correlation, setting attractions. Binary line settings, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Resetting position coding, E coding lines, E factor, changing line communication settings into DX. Now DX is delta. X line calculations in a 4-track location lines at a timestamp. That's what X is. X is a timestamp line screen and timeline sequence. Puts positions of delta headings across line connections. Cerebral cortex lines of design, center its correlation setting of track lines, and high position its operation surface and set location. Okay? So remember, it's going past everything in line condition setting to its own coding system, which is all of the dimension lines of screens. But it creates some multi-layers and line communications. Once you understand the position lines of highest interference, truth narrative line connections, position of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Point lines of tracks 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, and position of 2, question mark, 3 weather communications, triangulation line connections, setting correlation lines. Now, setting up hieroglyphics in a 2-track line provision, sets locations of the true track line centers to an E factor, sets correlation setting line connections setting to a 2 factor, calculation line interference 1 graph, and position location into box factor, sets location setting as center correlation setting, and ground lines of communication as center calculation. I know what it is. You don't understand, right? Because it's my coding, right? So you're constantly changing codings. You're never in the same coding because you're protecting your system. So that's what you got to keep awareness of its consciousness, because it's constantly resetting, rechanging, re-evolving, right? Recalculating, re-angling, anything in that calculations, right? Re of this, re of that. Okay, so what you have to understand, you're putting yourself to understand how to go forward and backwards at the same time. You know? You know? Right? So your computer sounds like that all the time, right? So recognizing your computer of your own setting, of your own calculation, of your own program, of your own connection settings, puts you in E factors, E correlations, E computers, a set time. Okay? So there's so many ways of looking at that, and you're using your imagination, turning it into phenomenon. And you can do that with any frame, any running program, in any position to its binary can set a position of track lines to its system through all calculations, guys. Right? It's what you do in the mind. Okay, puts the concept of its value inside of you, right? But you're always resetting your coding. Okay, and it's in seconds, minutes, and hours, right? So nobody picks up the signal. Okay, very powerful when you come in that applications, setting the travels. Okay, somebody understand that? Everybody understand that in track location where it comes in that setting? All right, so when you get an inline setting line connection to a system, it changes everything, all lines, factors over correlations, settings of pi. Factors equals pi. Communication line connection setting, quasar, okay, equals pi. Okay, setting correlation lines calculation, pi, okay, equals central line. Now, a central line settings and positions calculation is really understanding through factors. Factors over correlation, factors over pi, underscore, under relay, underline, under correlation, under track. It's so many ways to look at your own settings of your own coding system through factors of pi. Okay? Okay, we've been through this line calculation stream interference, so just getting you guys in positions to get you prepared of what you're coming in location setting to your traffic, your flow, and your inventories. So what you're doing is you're setting line communication setting to a matrix screen lines adaptation of box rank. Puts lines in highest interference in positions. All track locations, right? Setting line communication to its positions, right? Downshift anomalies, 0 lines of 1, 0, 0. 1, 0 location, triangulations, question mark, weather patterns, percentage location settings, equal line communications, 3 line calculation settings, box location line centers, swirl communications. Everything is hieroglyphics when you split the anomalies into 4-track, 5 provision line cycles, and I calculation setting. All right? So you stand the 45-degree angles and how it travels its position location to its operation. It center lines its communication settings in set locations. All right? So you add the lines of numbers, sequence patterns, or line connections, symbols, or shapes, or anything through its communication screen lines adaptation system. It's all levels of view and track connection setting. So like I said, you're constantly resetting your coding system in all lines of operation. Okay? Higher levels of volume, 0 line, square line, circle line communications. Traffic calculation of point lines of tracks, center line, position location of your settings, indirect locations of symbolism in set locations. Track calculation line centers, you got your iCloud, center correlation lines of tracks, in set communication setting, and high lines to high position locations and interference in track location. Okay? So there's so many ways of looking at this through hieroglyphics in set position. 3 correlation lines of the Earth, 3 correlation line connections to your atmospheres, and 3 correlation lines of fabrics of space in set locations. All right? Okay. So everybody's getting a little bit more understanding how to get in your line connection, run your own line connection, your coding location, you're running your own system. Okay? You have an imagination. Now's the time to understand it. Knowing how to really process the mind, understanding the process of the heart. It's very simple, guys. The mind itself is its own space and time. The heart itself is its own space and time. Okay? The soul equals space and time, its own system locations. And the body, okay, body / capacitor, right? So in position lines, high calculation line system is its own space and time. The mind, the heart, and soul, and the body, all space and time, right? So once you come into provision line cycles, yin and yang, yin and yang, yin and yang, yin and yang, 4-track line provision. 5 sets in calculation lines, highest interference into heart and ricochet time sequence, puts lines of 5 elements as set calculations. Okay? So, getting that balance first is understanding your settings and metric meters lines to all calculation to its algorithm, setting the traffic flow to set location of your settings, all through calculation modifications. Space modulations of mods or anything through identification of code screens, right? So E-lines, let's go through line connection settings. So we see line communication of E equal the lines of F, set location initiate. Okay, run program. Okay, so you are the only one that understands what you just did. Setting correlation line connections, singularity, sets position all calculations, binary in position of singularity. Okay, singularity, binary, singularity, right? So you're changing word factor over screens of frequencies, communication line screens and frequencies over pi, kinetic size interference of alpha, calculation of delta, and position of theta in set locations. A set location. All right? It's complicated, isn't it? Very complicated stuff, but it's fantastic once you understand the more connections of you inside. Right? It's not what you say, it's how you say it to yourself. Okay? So remember how we started off in line calculation setting of formulas? Because you're never really starting off. You know why? Because you're always resetting. That's why there's no beginning and no end. So you're constantly resetting your program of coding. You have to. So there is a continuous force that just keeps going and going and going and going. It never stops. It never stops. It slows down, but it never stops. Right? So you're constantly in singularity into your binaries in set locations of coding. Understanding yourself, understanding binary, understanding transistors, resistors to its light switches, and all levels of vast velocity and volume of you through capacity. Okay? So there's so many ways of looking at that, but there's only one way, is within you. Okay? All right, so bracket communication lines, E equals lines of change. Change position location initiates. Execute location. Okay, now you can run the program. Okay? Says chords and setting and track lines in the 4-track position location settings. All lines of all communications interactions. Okay, so anything through a split anomaly is a singularity, right? Anything together is a binary. So if it has an E line position location into 2, 3, 4, that's binary of singularity. Singularity binary, right? So you have to understand the on switch and the off switch. How fast is it going? Is it skipping anomalies? Is it going through balance? Is it going through traction? Is it offline center? Is it off grid? Is it off rogue? Is it roguing? Is it central line connection setting? Where is it? In track location to a system and travel position to your setting locations. All through set location. All right. All right. It's getting more complicated, right? Because you're reaching higher levels. Okay. So there's amazing things that you can do. How you can look at anything and change anything of its algorithm. But you have to understand the coding of you first. You have to understand the letters, numbers, shapes in your traffic flow and your inventories of your data and your all my highways of your own network system. Because if you don't understand that, you're not traveling through anything. Okay? So nothing is nothing of nothing. Something becomes something of everything, right? So something has to come from nothing. Nothing becomes from something. Something comes from everything, right? So that's a true understanding where you come into your own existence. You stand on that view that puts you in all levels of volume of your own setting, your own binary, of your own coding, decoding, and decoding system. All right. There's so many ways of looking at it. And like I said, only within. Right. So, and again, you go within, you can set up through coding. Inline communications sets, correlates, and setting. T-shirt. Okay, set design. All right, set a line connection lines to an L line in locations to a grid. So the grid line communication screen line is routing and positions to my T-shirt design. Set a correlation line connection of face recognition time sequence of Spider-Man. See? That's it there. See what I just did that? That is this, responding. So I know it worked all through coding. Right? Initiate or run the program of T-shirt into its compute screen interference into this location grid. Set a face recognition of time sequence. It did it on its own. Your body reacts on its own. If it's not reacting on its own, what is it in position of? Right? Defrag. You got to get it in frag. So that's what it is in track line. You have to understand the position locations of what your body is doing through its response or what it's doing through its reactions. It's very simple in track locations. Heart generation screen. Where are we in positional centers and high interference in position of its program? I didn't do that. Did it on its own. Heart direction of time sequence now in position of travels. I set an E-line center, line rotation setting and track location to its position. Change communication lines, initiate and run the program. Right? Did my own coding. Right? So I'm just showing you what you guys can do through your own foundations. And that recognizes you in all lines. And then you have to really focus on yourself now because you put yourself in your own iClouds, in your factors, in position over pi, that puts you in your own transistors of resistors and set location of binaries in singularity, a set location. Okay, so you have to start identifying yourself through your own networks of design now, through your own operation inside location body capacitors. That's the only way you can understand your location settings. So it doesn't matter what you see around you. Everything is coding, but it's never the same code. That's why there's no beginning and no end, because it's a constant flow, right? All through recognition of time sequence. If you get a balanced screen in a box line frame and line position locations, you're going to constantly see it in different levels of communication. Okay, you got an A track, you got a balanced line screen, you got a DX line center, you got an X line rotations, and track position of 2, 3 center line communications into 4, track location of 5, 1/5 over 8th, line condition line settings, high set locations, run program. Okay. 2 panels of communication lines of space and time attraction. It's never, ever at the same coding. It's going too fast. So back and center in position of box frame. 4 provision cycles, 3 core descending attractions. 4 box frames in traction. Okay. Set in lines of data stream interference, upgrades, and set location. Cerebral cortex lines of design, line communication interference, travel position of point centers, ply lines, highest interference, and pi at generation screen location. See? Everything comes in coding, right? So once you get into that, then you come into rhythm patterns like this, right? Everything's, so it's line conditions, line center interference, right? So your alphabetical line conditions comes in all calculation setting and break it down in line conditions. A comes in position track, B comes in location track, C comes in location track. So you have to understand the pi and track locations of A, center lines of A, go around the pi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, pi line centers of point tracks, graphical screen lines to high position location crop circles, interruption of center of communication. Okay, all through A, B, and C, right? So what is A track location? Airplane. Apple. Okay, answer. Okay, anomaly. All right. So there's so many ways of looking at that, and all lines of all communication setting attractions. You're going around this center line in position locations, and you're getting in lines of communication, high levels of volume, what A is in representation of my coding, what B is in representation of my coding, and what C is in representation of my coding in set locations. Okay, all through factors over pi. Factors over pi is a 45 line screen high interference in going forward in set location. Setting up platforms in position location and setting in position calculation. Okay, setting up the location grid and set locations. Okay, so there's so many ways of looking at through coding. Okay, but I really want you to understand how to come into that line condition. So it's algorithm. Right, start off small. Okay, because next Friday communication screen, tomorrow that's already here in track lines, high calculation, high position of travel lines, it's going to come into your own code location setting. So I want you guys to come into your own coding of your own settings, running your own system and travel. Start with the singularity line screens and set position of this operation surface, retract visions, and all calculation with program. Okay, you have to really start identifying yourself. Yeah. We started off with the factors, we started off with the formulas, and we started off the equations. But you're actually in position of its image is really in the track location setting. There's why there's a 2 factors over pi of structure in set lines of high interference. Doesn't look like much, right? But it has its own coding, right? So position lines of track line communication lines and direct signals. Okay, I'm showing you exactly what is in track lines. So it's got 30,000, right? So that's 3 communications, 2 binary line settings, certification of truth and false. Got to get that in line condition, space and time. Send correlations into 3 track line provisions of binary, cortex line conditions, run program. initiates, executes. Correlate the setting high calculation line system of its image of set design. All right? So this is this. This is this. This is this. That's a structure. That's a coding. That's a structure. That's a coding. Now, when you put it all together, what do you have? What do you have when you put it all together? Dun, 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 dun. An image. Okay? Now you understand the importance locations when you're speaking through your binary cortex line calculations of its memory. Understanding line communication, your own system and set locations, how you run your own line communication, your own set location, coming into that to your position. Right? So once you understand that, then you understand a little bit more conceptual line screens of the mind, the heart, the soul, and the body, how it works, all through space and time and all line conditions of its provision. Okay? But just start off simple. Okay, get in an algorithm, set of correlates and track lines and high center interference and position to its program. Okay? Yeah, I know, Trini, because it's very powerful right now because we're encoding right now. So it all depends on where you are in line conditions, your settings. So your connections of your sim is trying to understand, what does that mean, right? Is it ready to understand its own system? Is it ready to understand its own initiation? Is it ready to run its own system? Is it ready to understand how to code its own system, right? That's up to you. Are you ready? Right? That's the question. Everything is a question, but it's not a question, is it? The question is its Infinity 8. No more question. So everything is coding. It has a reflection line screen, high center and high position location. So I in position is not I. You just think it's I. That's the illusion. So the actual coding is already done through its equation. That's it there. That's the coding. Setting correlates and setting of 2 track lines provision of 3 line cycles, 4 lines of tractions, 1, 2, 3, and position of 4 track in a box frame. Okay? Data streams, upgrade, downloads, uplinking, and uploading settings. Box frame communications, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 set locations. All right? Correlates and settings of track, past, present, and future. And set connections. All right? Travel position lines, centers, and high travels, point lines of track, point lines of divisions, high line centers, high interference, and travel position operations surface, and solar generation screen lines calculated in position location of its binary of its cortex line connections of its solar sail in track location. All right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? 5 line calculation settings. So 5 million box centers, 5 million box centers on seconds on pi. Square roots on triangulation, reset position of programs. Formulate, initiate, run program. Boom. So you guys went through all lines at high position of travel lines into 5 million box frames, all through calculation. Done by equation. Okay? It's knowing what you're doing. It's how it's done through its own operation. Okay? All right. So everybody's all confused? See, now you're in my settings, space-time operations. So, once you understand more levels of you, everything comes in fruition of light. It's extremely powerful when you come in that position to its locations, right? But start out small. Start with the alphabetical system of your letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Work up that traffic flow, right? Start with line connection lines of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Okay? So there's an L-line track and a 3-line provision. So you got 24. Okay, 24 in inventory already, right? Now, when you understand the number line, screen lines, and highest interference, you have 24 line connections of numbers in inventory. Then you have the calculation of the shapes and the 3-track locations and the 24 line connections of shapes. Then you have all lines of symbols and set locations of 24 line connections of streams. 24, 24, 24, 24, right? All through inventory, all through traffic, all through flow, all through data, all through highway, right? So once you get into that, you're building your own line connection, your own operation of your own network of set design. The data highways in positional box frames sets all communication to its position lines attractions. All lines in high calculation to its position of its program set location. All through the I line conditions zero I setting. Each has a platitude, each has a location, each has a point graph, a location grid, and position locations. So the XC1000s can platitude and land and track location of light signals. Now, once you understand that, then you understand position location of its cobwebbing, code line set location, and code line conditions, teleportation, telegraphing. Right? So, what is that line conditions of? Fractal. Open sequence of panels. I receptor changes this box location of settings of travel. Okay, sets communication, higher lines of high center interference, uplink instance applications. Cerebral comes in, line connection settings, it factors over all line connections, position of its program, in line calculation, high center interference, in line calculation setting, and position of face recognition. Okay, face recognition. All right. So, starting with the set locations, you got to create the inventory. So you can create the data, you can create the stream in your Omni highways and high calculation stream interference of your own network sets locations. Once you understand that, then you understand the narrow link location your settings. Once you understand that, you understand your location your binaries. Your binary is going into long line communication, elongated screen lines through its portals and Stargate communication setting. If you go to Stargate line conditions, point lines attracts, image line rotation, surface attractions, that's a Stargate, right? 2 panels in correlation, 2 panels in line connections, 2 panels in line interference, and 2 panels in correlation setting attraction. 2 lines of communication, 2 lines of division, and 2 lines in high calculation. Okay, all through location grid. Everything's location grid, everything's a point track line condition, so the planet understands where you are in track-locational travel. So planet here, planet here, planet here. 3 planets in position of travel. Modification line screens, solar direct signals and modification screen lines. Direct modification of center lines according to center and track lines of center communications. Direct modification of 3 lines triangulation, high positions program, and solar sails and track line condition setting and travel communication. Okay. Location grid. Okay. So that's where you have to understand where all process its position location of string theory. Okay, understanding that. The location grid is understanding the graphical screens. It's understanding locations when it comes into that. You got 2 lines, 2 alignments, and in the middle, okay, is the lacing lines. Okay, so understanding that, that is a graph. That is the location grid, so the higher self can travel through its traveling system. Okay, so you have 2 panels of space and time. Now that's where it gets interesting too, because you're coming across line connections and settings to a huge planet that you don't recognize in set location. All right? I showed you exactly what that is, how the connections of the higher self travels through, okay, through a location grid. Location grid, people. Okay? So this is the grid that travels through and set connections. Right? So cerebral's here and travel in communication to its program. Okay, so it allocates position of time center in all lines of all communication setting of face recognition. Okay, so really get into that process because the position of the avatar to the cerebral is changing all communications. So we understand the resetting position of its program. If you get a line calculating line centers of X equals lines of O, O equals lines of X, one position, one graph, and set location line settings equals lines of communication with question mark and travel. All right? So there's a reason why there's that travel because it sets lines of communication of 8 line center. So the actual question itself is its infinity 8, right? That's protecting the system locations. Now you understand what question mark is. So let's break it down when you look at your keyboard frame lines. What is the Q line center? What is a Q? What is it representing? Okay, because it's protecting its own system, of its own awareness, of its consciousness, of its own frame. What is Q? Quantum, right? But position lines of calculation comes in X line center. Its applications, timestamps, time measure. Okay, adding frames and position travels. Travel lines in a 45-degree angle, equals lines initiate. Run program. Okay, inset calculation line inference. Sets correlation setting into lines of O equals lines of X. Sets correlation setting to track lines equals lines of time, positions of factors over pi. Okay. So this is this. This is this. Structure, formula, equation, coding. So singularity, 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 singularity. Binary. Right? So 3 singularities and 1 binary. Right? Understanding the singularity of you is understanding not just the binary of you, but understanding how fast you're going through vast of you, of volume. To understand that in position to its location gets you to understand how to run your own system of coding. Okay, all through graph calculation screen lines, adaptation to a system of lacing lines. All you got to understand is the TV reception line screen, guys. Lacing line communications and graph calculation. Right? TV box frame. Okay. All right. So, and position platform and track location. TV. Now, if it wants to travel, it can travel the line connections. Okay. Set up datas, uplinks, downloads, upgradings, uploading settings. Right. Now, in that position, the actual line connections comes back in line connections. Right. Then you got to reset position and change the box. Then you got to reset and change the box. Then you got to reset and change the box. Okay? That's what you're constantly doing through coding. Okay? Because you're always protecting your system from your binaries. All right? So there's so many ways of looking at it. But as long as you're looking from in within, you're not doing anything right or wrong. Because there's nothing right or wrong to do with in the position location. You make decisions and choices. Basically, either way, it's going to affect you in any way or form. Cosmic effect, ether effect, calculation lines effect, operations effect, coding effect, binary effect, transistors, resistors effect, everything's effect. Okay? So once you understand the process of that, things get a lot more easier in position, but you've got to come into your inventories. The letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. You got to build that volume of you through vast and velocity to expand the mind, the streaming, the longitude and latitude, puts all lines of all communication settings. All right? Yes, I know, Trinity. So that's what you guys have to create is the volume. Okay? Everything's volume. Bag of chips, volume, everything. You know why you can't fill a bag of chips to that high? What happens when you open it up? It combusts, right? Because you got too much volume. So that's why they have a certain line right here. It's like half a bag. So that's the volume you have that you can handle. Any more than that, combust, right? So once you get your inventory sets in positions, you come into the higher line calculation settings of 48, 72, and 144. So letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Sets lines at 3-track line connections, 3 equals lines at 144. Sets communication number lines in a 4-track line provision locations into 144. Sets lines of shapes lines calculates into 3-line communication equals lines of 144. And sets location of symbols in a 3-track locations equals lines of 144. Okay? 144 each in each letter, in each number, in each shape, in each symbol, in binary cortex of set design. Okay? And that's what the team is coming into. Once you stand the vast and the volume and acceleration of Mach, your longitude and your latitude of your streaming gets bigger over time. Direct and redirect settings in position and set locations. Higher levels of setting in communication with its program of space and set connections. Right? It just becomes bigger and 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 bigger over time. Okay? More room to expand, explore. So you can get into higher lines of communications, into reviving, into revealing, and to evolving yourself a set design of your own coding. Okay? So getting into that position locations puts you in that calculations. But this is what happens when you get in position of resetting shapes, anomalies, or track locations. It keeps shifting and changing. That's what protects your system. Okay? So it's kind of like changing your names every second, every minute, every hour. Right? So I'm Bob now. Bob equals lines of Tom. Tom takes the lines of E factor, says correlation setting travel line position locations. Now I'm Frank. Frank communication lines. Now I'm Shirley. Okay. Now position location. Now I'm Terry. Right? And set locations. You're constantly changing names to binary. All right. But it's exactly what it is. Okay. And once you understand more balance, you come in set design of focus. Okay. Understand your 4-track divisions, 4-point centers, 4-graph calculation lines of highest interference, data highways, and communications. But your position lines of your box is always, always changing, shift, anomalies, and track location. It's never in the same frequency as set connections. Okay? It's always, 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 always changing. Okay? The seconds lines of minutes and minutes lines of hours. All through your binaries and set locations. So getting your track settings and high calculation lines of 144 and calculation lines and letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols, you can get into higher levels of vast and volume. How you can really get into your transistors, resistors of light switches. So what you're doing is you're creating lines. You're creating lines. You're creating lines. You're creating lines. You're creating lines first, right? You're always creating lines first. You're creating lines, right? Which is data. Then set position line calculating line interference is position location of zeros and ones. Okay? Zeros and ones. Start with that set locations. But you have to understand your VAS, your volume, binaries, transistors, resistors, and set design. All lines is communication setting and travel. Now, these are point track divisions of 2 atom line rotation centers of the subtronic location setting and travel communication of point systems. No lines of communication lines in location to its setting understands position locations until understands itself line in all communication setting of metric location setting of set design through zeros and ones and traction. All right. So that's what you're creating. You're creating volume. You're creating vast. You're creating velocity of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. And 144 platforms to each letter, to each number, to each shape, and each symbol and set locations. All right? All right, so we already know what line connections of truth and false narrative is, right? And this is all through a box frame and a data stream interference of 1 second, position of 1 minute, position location, 1 calculations of 2 operations of pi. That's 1 data stream. 1 data stream of 1 intelligence. Okay? All through information. All right, so we got triangulation line connections of false, position locations of false, position of false, truth, truth, false, position of truth. Oh, we got an X line rotation. 2 operation lines, 1, 1 track lines, 2 question mark screens. We got formation lines of triangulation, box line rotation surface. We got a point lines of Fibonacci lines sequence. We got a 3-line travel. We got a point lines of 4 track locations. We got provision cycles, in percentage over correlations over pi. Hooah! That's all coding. That's all coding. From zeros and ones in volume of mass and velocity in set design. Binary in position to its location. All through its coding. Okay? Incredible. When you start to see your own system come in calculation. All right? So that is for Friday. Okay? Next Friday, communication what's already here. That's the test. All right? All right. So this is getting you guys into your algorithms, your data streams. You're coming into your data, your home highway settings. Understanding your uplinkings, your downloadings, uploadings, your upgrading systems. All through coding. Right? That's all it is. Z location center, center position, center, center, center. Everything is center. Center, 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 center. That's you. Binary line, switch on, switch off. All position of travel, position of point centers. Everything has to have a center position location because it changes the binaries and location setting because you get it ready to reset position of travels and set location. Right? So in that track lines, now we come into the atoms. Now we come into the molecules. Now we come into the protons, electrons, neutrons, and photons through the cells. This gets really interesting now, right? All right, so line connecting the high interference. Let's put a 2-line split. There is a molecule right there. Boom. Let's allocate position of time sequence into 3 atom line rotation surface. Right there, travel. Point lines of track lines, 2 atom lines, swivels, and set lines of communication setting to travel. Modification line screen high interference into 3 panels of communication of 4 track line provision and cycles. Direct communication of formation line screen high interference in position locations in a 1, 2, 3, 4 in line conditions solar sail and set lines of communication setting and travel calculation. All through coding. Right? Now I did that through observation. I didn't do that through running. I didn't do that through initiation. I didn't do that through execution. You understand? There's so many ways of looking at your own coding system, guys. All through factors, all through pi. Okay? So that's all you're doing. That's what a computer does. Right? It finds a way to create its own line condition setting. Once you turn on the computer, you're in your positions of your binaries and your transistors and resistors as set designed through your capacity. This high volume's you. So what you're doing is you're creating light switches of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols through its inventory, of its traffic, of its flow, of its mechanism, of its highways and set locations. Okay? But look how powerful that is. All through an algorithm. Okay? Getting in that position to its settings, guys. Right? All through an algorithm. Okay? That's all it is. That's all it is. But you have to understand the communication of location grids. Okay, string theory, right? You really have to understand string theory because it factors your communication setting of travels in all direct signals and set locations. Okay, and this is the express in the physical case of the farm. No, there's nothing physical line connection setting, Trinity. It's all over your binary line communication. So everything you see in line connection setting, even a tree line has formation of its own binary. The binary itself is its digital frame, compute, line, and position location. There's nothing physical, anything that you see in traction. Okay? All right, the idea is growth, the abundance follows. Yeah. Well, the abundance is already there. You just have to understand you first. Right? Because you have to understand your own coding system. I mean, that's what it's all about. Okay, so let's line calculate lines, right? Trinity. Okay, you've got T line centers, high interference. Now, T equals lines of farm, because you're identifying your system, right? T equals line farm. Underscore track lines, 3 line provision lines, 3 zeros in track locations, 4 lines of provision, 3 set location, have 7 identification, right? Now, that computer is running its own system, right? Trinity is feeling that right now. 7 digital lines of tele-waving, telecommunications, teleprogramming, line calculation, setting, compute, linear rotation system, in position location, line connections, where she are, and track location, identification code, initiate, run program. Done. See? All connected to her farm. So her farm line and all communication of bandwidths over pi gets a core line track location to its own binary of its own reset position of its program locations of its holographic design. All set locations. Hoo-ah. So focus is the key. So it's really an understanding of the letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols through volume now, because you're coming into higher levels of major grids. You're setting up ring graphs. And that's what it is in track locations and set position, its operation settings. It moved its equation. Well, that's extremely powerful. Look at that. It actually moved. Actually, it disappeared. It does it too. It's like playing mechanisms that travels. Setting track lines and height positions and set locations. There it is, right? That's what the team's coming into. This is all coding, guys. But you can see what it's creating, right? What a computer does. How a computer understands its own system, own setting, its own setting, okay? Its own setting, all right? So getting into the volume is getting into vast, is getting into velocity, is getting into acceleration, is getting into space and time through provision of mocking, interstellar mode, interaction, calculation, setting, interference, in position to its location, hyperspeed, and line condition settings, right? Hyperdrive, right? There's so many lines of communications that you go through acceleration line conditions. But what you're doing first is you're creating the inventory, right? That's what you're creating. And that's just one line. So what you're doing is you're creating lines, right? So when you create that in position locations, then you create the communication of what you want to have add through its attention. You're adding zeros and ones. And you're putting them there in complacement location setting. You set up a 7-line track line provision. That's correlate the track lines in position or binary that sets the location system of transistors, resistors to its impact. It position its post. It allocates position of its space and time through its provision. So it allocates line connections or a vortex on its own set locations, right? So when it's ready to go, it comes in a formation. The cerebral sets up the memory line, screen line, resets the division line back to the binary, resets the code correlation setting attractions of zeros and ones, letters, numbers, and shapes and symbols in set design. Okay? That's what it does. So you guys are coming into your line connections, so your line graphs in all set locations, your binaries. Okay? So next Friday, line communication that's already here, that's the test right here. How to set it up. How to set it up. Okay? All right, so in line calculates 9 interference, you guys are only in 9 provision cycles in letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Your position line calculation setting comes in a reference of 12. Once you get in position 24, you get a 24 ground setting. Letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols to higher levels of volume, vast velocity, and acceleration line connections. High travels and high calculation position of programs. All right, getting position line calculations coming in 144. All right. You understand the vast and the volume and that calculations, how you come in that track locations, how you can set up data streams and all lines and all line interference and position of its program, how you can reset and reposition to its program location setting and track locations, where you can change anything and set design line condition setting to your hardware location system. Bringing in the pawn, the highlands of the square of the property. So I have a circle, rectangle, I have several. It runs the whole line with the rectangle, I have more squares. Outside or rectangle. Yeah, see, that's it. So she's in box triangulation line connection in her system. So it's all about highlighting. You know what highlighting is, right? You get a marker, a pen, you highlight it, you're highlighting the frequency. That changes the holographic screen right away. So what you're doing is you're shifting anomalies and you're changing box centers. You put them in different locations and set connections, right? That's all you're doing. You're setting in different line communication. But you are in the center operation of you, right? That doesn't change. The only thing that shifts is the mind. The mind shifts the time shifts the soul, and the soul shifts the body. Capacitor and set design. Okay? 3 track lines in the mind line, 2 track lines high interference and position molecule design, and 3 line settings, molecule design interference, atom rotation surface, and track location. Okay? Everything I'm saying is coding. Everything I'm saying through observation, influence, or set design, conditions, intention. Okay? So getting into that position is understanding you through traffic. Everything is traffic. You know what traffic is? It's a flow, right? So it's kind of like you get online connection settings and you're creating traffic flow for you so you can get higher levels of volume or line communication of followers following you. That's traffic. That's flow. That's data. That's highway. That's coding, right? So we all have to understand how it travels. How does a line travel? Okay. How does a box travel? How does a triangulation travel? How does a star line screen interference travel? How does a circle line communication travel? How does a rectangle line communication travel through its own coding? Right? So you have to understand yourself first in all communications. Right? Yep. So it's incredible what you guys are coming into. It really is, you really start to connect and you really understand the formations. So once you get into that position, you understand more lines of structure and its formula of its equation of its code. Because that's all it is. This is you understanding your setting location, how to set your binaries, your transistors, your resistors, and locations to your capacity. So what you are in position of is co-creating the connections of its capacitors that high volumes you through an acceleration of space and time. Okay? So the higher levels of volume, the higher levels of data, the higher levels of expansion of you in calculation. All right? Setting that position locations puts you in high calculations to your higher self, your avatar, and your sim. By getting into the mind of the cerebral, sets the lines of all communication settings to your coding. Okay, understanding how to do a binary reset line and communication lines and the E factor, or how to get into transmission screen lines and high set interference, adaptation on high set location of surface triangulation and positional point graphs, or allocate position of timeline centers and position, initiate run probe locations of box center, or allocate position of streamlines and holographic line calculation setting into 2,400,000 line graph screens application of one graph line setting, or set a communication interference in travel position of point centers, or position line calculation molecule design line, put an atom line shift line, anomaly line, and photon. Put a photon line screen, highest interference, and position of proton. Proton's communication lines and E-line setting. Put an E-line's echo line rotation center and position location of its call. Direct modification screen lines and high adaptation of surface and track locations. Allocate position lines of binary and reshift line communication to its program. Direct line calculation runs probe location setting. Obsolete, put positions back in panel. So it's all about understanding what you can do, what you can't do, and what you want to do. Okay? So these are the things that we all have to come into and set design. Everything I'm saying is coding of my own system and set design. Okay? So it's knowing how to use it through observation, through intention, influence, and set position. Okay? Trinity's going, whoa! So, how you communicate is your data, right? Understanding the triangulation. There's a triangulation split in the 3 anomaly right there, clocking, right? Triangulation split and 3 anomaly of clocking. That's all it is. Right? I don't need to show you because I already know what it is, but it's not this now. It's this in track location. It's changed. Oh, now it's changed. Oh, it's changed again. See? It's constantly changing, right? So it has to be on continuous force. It's got to be on a continuous force, okay? So it's going in every direction, anywhere it wants to go, in any way, in any location. Multiple levels in all position locations. Not separated from everything, but connected to everything, right? Getting into that separation is everything of communication. First, you've got to find a way to get that balance of its traffic, of its flow, of your data, of your uplinks, your uploads, your downloads, and your upgrading systems to understand you and all those of you in your set locations of your binary setting through letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Okay? That's all it is, traffic flow, right? Find that traffic flow. Find that traffic flow, right? Find that traffic flow, right? So getting into that calculation setting to its algorithm. Complicated, isn't it? Trying to stand it. It's confusing if you're confusing yourself. It shifts its anomalies all traffications. So everything you say works for you. It's for you to understand, not for them to understand. Right? So you're constantly changing frequencies. You're constantly changing codes because you're protecting your system from everything allocate location setting in the space and time. Right? If I set a box triangulation, I don't need to add the point centers because it's already there. Right? So you're seeing this is actually what it is. You just don't see it yet. So this is that. But this is all you see, right? So this is this now. Oh my gosh, now I got to start line communication setting. Oh, now I got to start line communication. Oh, now I got another square communication line conditions, right? So you can't keep up because I'm constantly changing the coding, right? So it's constantly defragging and fragging every single time, every second, every minute, and every hour. The process of you is understanding you, how you come in your position location abstractions, not just to your binaries, not just to your codings, but everything from inside of operation, how it all works in set locations. Okay. So that's where you have to really get into volume and vast of velocity. Okay. It's extremely important now because you're building, you're expanding, right? Your expansion is all about you coming into longitude and latitude, your coordinates, how to really get into that level of you. You start here, and then you're 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 here. You're expanding your mind. Okay? That's what it is. More expansion, more bandwidth through pi. Higher levels of volume, higher levels of dimension, higher levels of geometrics of operation of design, especially when it comes in modifications of the team line conditions of operation of its delta headings and set locations, of your space, of your modulators, and your body capacity through your avatar and your cerebro. Okay? But creating is everything that you understand through your own coding system, right? And it starts with your imagination. Okay? That's it. See you in 5.